I wish I had a recording of the sound of the ocean coming in and out from the sand, but unfortunately I don't. This is a nice relaxing painting to paint and actually very, very easy to do. I named my painting Frothing. All you need to really draw is your horizon line, the line where the top of the big wave starts to curl over, and your froth line on the beach. We are going to be just using a few colors today. Cerulean blue. We're going to be using some indigo blue. We're going to be using some black. We're going to be using some burnt umber. We're going to be using our Chinese white also, so make sure you have that ready. That will be at the very end. For our brushes, we're going to be using our nice big 2-inch flat. We're going to be using a number 2 and a number 4 round. If you don't have a number 4 round, you could easily use a number 6. We're going to be using a number 1 rigger and also a very fine liner. We're going to be using our fan brush. We are going to be using table salt. And also, if you have one and you'd like to use it for splashing, we're going to be using a wisp brush. We're going to be painting our sky first with our nice big number 2, and I am using just straight cerulean for this. Nice and wet so that it's wet the whole way across and remains nice and wet, so there's no hard lines in the sky at all. So dip into your paint quite often. Make sure it's nice and wet so that you can get all the way across your paper and then come back and even things out. It has to stay nice and wet for that entire process. So make sure you have a lot of water to your paint so that it will flow nicely and smoothly for you. Once you have your paint nice and smooth, then over on the right hand side I added a little bit of watered down indigo just to give that one side a little bit of deepness. I want to lift my paper and wipe off my table so I don't get a washback. And I'm also lifting my paper in all directions so that my paint evens itself out and has a nice even tone to it. I want my sky to dry nicely, and then I'm going to go up to where my water actually comes up onto my sand. I'm going to wet that with plain water, that whole area. If you have a little bit of blue on your brush, it's fine because there's going to be blue water there anyway. But I want to wet that whole area because when I put in my sand color, which is burnt umber, very watered down, mixed with a little bit of black, I'm painting that sand color up into my water about where my water would be very shallow. So you're going to take it over your froth line, but not all the way up to the big wave. And this is burnt umber mixed with some black. Not real dark because we're going to add some other layers later, but you want it dark enough that you don't have to repaint the whole thing. This is umber mixed with some black. If you have to add some more color, that's fine, but when you add it, you want to make sure you're still nice and wet. You have a nice even flow. And the top of that paint line, you want to make sure that you just go over that with a wet brush, just with water, to soften that line so that you don't have a hard line in your wave. Once you get your paint where you want it and you have the colors that you want, if you want to get a little bit darker in some areas, as long as you're nice and wet, you can go ahead and add that in and it'll just blend right in for you. After you get your color on that you want, then we are going to put a little bit of salt in the brown area, not so much where the water is, but where the plain sand will be. You want to put some salt on so you get some nice texturing there. Then you want to allow everything to dry really well. Either let it dry naturally or you can use a hair dryer once your salt has interacted with the paint and given you your little texture dots. You want to get everything nice and dry, and then once it's dry, we're going to take that salt off. If you don't get every little bit of salt off, that's perfectly fine, but you want to get the majority of it off so that we can continue on. We are going to be working now on the ocean, the part right below the horizon line. We're going to be dry brushing first, and we're going to be dry brushing with indigo. When we dry brush, we want to dry brush horizontally all the way across, first at the horizon line, and then in some areas we can bring that dry brushing forward. You don't want to bring it too far forward. We want to come down about halfway between the wave line and the horizon line, and not everywhere, because we want to create some different areas of depth in the ocean. This is done just with our indigo color, and I used a number 4 round for my dry brushing. Now you want to make sure everything is dry before we put on our next wash of color. Our next wash of color is going to be the same color as the sky, that nice cerulean blue. We're going to water that blue down, but first we are going to be wetting the froth line just with plain water. So everywhere that you drew in your froth line, we're going to wet along that with some plain water, take that up into the water a little bit, so that when we put on our next color of cerulean blue, that area of the froth line will be less intense in color because of the water. We want to see blue, but we also want to see the sand color through that. So I'm wetting that whole froth line all the way across, taking it a little bit up into the sand line, and then from the top of my wave line, I'm putting on that plain cerulean blue color and bringing it into the area where I wet, the froth line that I wet. I'm using my big brush first, and then I will get into the exact froth line lines with my smaller brush. But this plain watered down cerulean blue is going to go from the top of the wave all the way up, from the top of the horizon line all the way down to the froth line. So you're taking that all the way up and over where you dry brushed in the water, all the way up to the horizon line. That goes from the horizon line down to the edge of the froth line. Now, while you are still nice and wet, we're going to go back into our indigo, and we're going to put a nice line of indigo, nice and wet, all the way across our ocean at the horizon line, so that that ocean farthest out looks much deeper because of the deeper color of blue. This is just your indigo color. It's going all the way across. And that's not white paint on your horizon line. That's actually the glare from the overhead light I'm using. So you have that plain indigo color all the way across, and then you can pull it forward in a couple smaller lines, but don't go beyond the top of the big wave. Now, still being nice and wet, we're going to put that same indigo color along the lower portion to the mid portion of the big wave. If you look at your picture, you'll see where that nice dark color is in the wave. That's where you want to put this initial watered down indigo, right along the wave. Nice and wet. You're going to bring that color down closer into the froth area, but not all the way to the froth line, because we're going to go back in there and deepen the curl over part of the wave with the deepest indigo color. But we need to add some of that indigo into the area that's going to come up onto the beach. You want to be nice and wet when you do that. You don't want to be dry so that you're getting hard lines. You want everything to be nice and wet so that you're going to have nice edges that are soft. If you need to deepen your horizon line because it blended too much, please do. And then again, if you have lost any of your darker indigo lines that look like the ripples coming in, you can still go ahead and add them. Now once this all dries, you'll see that it dries much lighter. So now I am putting a nice wet wash of watered down indigo on my whole ocean area, all the way up to close to the top of my wave line, and then I'm just dry brushing that off. Okay, you don't have to use your wet brush or anything, just dry brush it off. But now you've made your ocean just a little bit deeper in color, and you can go ahead and still darken your horizon line with your indigo if you feel that it needs it. At this point too, once you've added all of that and you have your ocean re-wet, you can go and add a little bit of salt there now to get a little bit of texture in that water, and it'll make it look like the water is rippling. Not a whole lot, just a little bit here and there. Wait for that to dry well, and then you can brush that salt off. Again, if it doesn't all come off, that's fine, but at least get it off the wave area, because now we're going to really deepen that wave with our indigo. You want to make sure that you have it wet. I'm wetting it first, just with some plain water, not the whole wave. I'm wetting underneath the wave so that when I start to put my indigo on, I won't have just a hard line. I'll have a nice soft edge to it on the bottom. You can have a hard edge on the top of your wave, but on the bottom you want a little bit of a softer edge. This is straight indigo. You can see that it's much more intense than before because you want that nice curl over wave to be really deep in color. So this is my number 4 brush. You can use your number 4 or a number 6, and you want to go ahead and paint in that whole wave with your indigo. Not the area below the wave. This is we want to leave it just at the wave for right now. And you're going to go almost the whole way across, but that rollover wave kind of lessens on the far right side. So once you get that on there, then you're going to take your big brush, just with some water, soften the bottom edge of the wave a little bit. Go ahead and add some more of that nice deep indigo, and the bottom edge is going to be nice and soft, but you're still going to have that really great intense color. Now just in the area where my water looks a little darker towards the center of that big wave, I'm going to add that little bit of indigo there. And I'm going to go along the edge of my froth now. The part that is up on the sand, I'm going to add a little bit of indigo right along that drawn edge so that I can tell where that froth is going to be exactly now. Just with my, you can use your number 2 round or your number 4 round. You want to go ahead and go in and actually draw that exact line of your froth, where your froth is, and then we are going to allow that to dry. If your sand needs deepened, and this is only if it's still too light. If it's already dark enough, you don't have to do this step. But if not, then you want to mix some of your umber and your black again and take that right up to your froth line. You're doing kind of a two-step thing here. You're doing your sand from the right and your water from the left. But you want to make sure that your water is dry before you do your sand. You don't want a soft edge. You don't want them hitting each other and blending into each other. And now you can see you have an exact froth line. And you want to make sure that your wave is nice and dark. You should still be kind of wet or damp in there because you put a lot of water in there with that wave, a lot of wet indigo paint. So you can still go ahead and add some if you're nice and wet and let it blend in, but you want to make sure you are nice and dark because that rollover wave is gonna kind of divide that picture in half, from the nice calmer ocean in the back to this rough rollover wave. Use that same indigo and go ahead and add a little bit more dry brushing in your ocean area. If you have a lot of great dry brushing and you don't think you need any more, then just leave it alone. But otherwise, especially towards the center, I added some to keep my eye centered on that nice wave. I'm continually deepening my horizon line with indigo because that ocean farther out there is the deepest ocean, so you want to make sure it's the deepest blue color. Now I'm going to take my umber and black and I'm going to dry brush from the edge of my froth up into the sand, and I'm going to give it a slight lift, meaning I'm arching that dry brushing just slightly so that the sand doesn't look like it's so flat. Your sand usually has to go downhill a little bit into the ocean, and I want to create that with my dry brushing look. So from my froth line, and not everywhere, I'm picking out certain areas where I want that dry brushing to be. I'm making it kind of go uphill towards the right of my picture. You can add some salting also. If you didn't get a lot of nice texture before, then you can go ahead and add a little bit of salt now into your dry brushing and create some additional texture. If your indigo created some exact shapes like mine did, I don't want those exact shapes. So being that it's nice and wet, I'm going to go ahead and take my brush and just go in and make those shapes not be those shapes any longer and make it look more like water coming in on the beach. That's only if you have some shapes that are going to make your water look a little bit odd. Now I'm taking off the majority of my salt now, trying to get some, the big parts off of salt. If you don't get it all off, again, that's fine, but try to get most of your salt off now at this point, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to re-wet my sky. You have to make sure, though, that your sky is super dry before you do this part. And you can kind of do this part anytime. So if your sky is still a little damp or you're not sure if it's dry enough, you can hold off. But I wanted to make the left side of my sky just a little bit darker. So I re-wet the whole sky with water so that it'll have a nice flow to it. And I added that little bit of indigo, and then I'm just going to let it bleed around in the plain water so that I have that nice soft edge. I don't want a hard edge on my sky, but I do want a little bit of a deeper color on the right hand side of my sky. So I'm lifting my paper up, letting that wash around, letting that move around a little bit. Sorry, it's out of scene there, but you can still see what I've done. Moved it around so that it's kind of blended and has a nice soft blend to it. Now my white is going to begin, and you are going to be spending almost the rest of your painting time with your white. I always keep my white in a separate container. And now we are going to be doing the biggest areas of white. So if you look at your picture, you'll see where there's a lot of bigger, thicker areas of the froth. Not so much at the froth line on the beach, but in the shallow water where you have those big, thick areas. So I'm painting that with a nice bigger brush. You don't have to use your flat, but you can certainly use your number 6 or even a number 8 to get those bigger parts in. And what I really strongly suggest you do is do this in about 1-inch section of your painting. Allow it to dry so that you can see if your white is going to be intense enough, because white dries so much lighter, and if you've painted that whole section and then it dries too light, you're going to have to repaint it. So paint a small section, let it dry, make sure it's intense enough, and then you can continue to paint the remainder of your picture. You're going to go from right to left or left to right, it doesn't matter, but you're just going to be moving your paintbrush horizontally and painting in some whole sections. And those whole sections that you're painting in, you're going to throw some salt on those, because that's going to give the effect of all those little teeny tiny bubbles and splashes. So throw some salt on those bigger sections. Make sure that your paint is intense enough so that it doesn't dry and it's so see-through that you hardly see it. Once that dries, then we're going to go back in and work with a smaller brush. But we want to get all of those nice biggest areas first before we work with a small brush. You're going to paint in a lot of those sections, leave a lot of that blue show through. Really look at your picture now so you can understand what you need to do. Now it's dry. I'm going to again brush off the majority of the salt, And I'm going to be working now with my rigger, my real thin rigger, not the liner, but the rigger. And I'm going to start to do all of those really tiny little lines of froth now. Look at your picture to understand what we're doing. We're going to work at the very top of the wave. We're going to take that brush and work horizontally up to the top of the wave here and there. The majority of that nice dark wave, the curl over part, does not have any white, but some of it does. When I get to the top of that wave, I'm laying my rigger down on its side and arching it forward to give me that nice little curl over of the wave. I'm working a little bit at a time. This is going to take you a lot of time to do. It might wear your nerves thin, so work a little bit at a time. Walk away, then you can come back to it. You are working all of these nice thin froth lines all the way across. Look at your picture. You certainly do not have to follow this picture exactly, but you want to follow it just to understand how your froth line should be. You're almost going to be outlining where you see the blue in your froth that you already painted. You don't want to cover those blue holes up. That's what you want to emphasize with your smaller brush or with your rigger. You're going to work that all the way up to the froth closest to the sand, and you're going to work it all the way across. The froth line right at the beach, right at the sand, you can actually use your number 2 round for, because that's going to be a nice thick line of froth. That's where all the froth has already come forward and gathered. So it's going to be a thicker line of froth. Otherwise, you want to use your rigger and your fine scripter to do all of your other really fine lines. We're going to be doing some splatter, and that splatter will come on either as you go or at the very end, whatever you're most comfortable with. take your time. Take your time. If you need to stop and walk away, please do. But take your time. You don't want to mess this up. And too much, less is better. You can always add. Less is better. I can't say it enough times. Less is better. Less is better. You can always add some white, but you can't take it away. You'll make a complete mess. So you want to just do a little bit at a time. Add a little bit at a time. If you want to, you can jump from section to section. Whatever is the best way for you to do it. If you need to get up and walk away from it, you can come back to it later. You can come back to it tomorrow. You can come back to it next week. But you want to just take your time, because all of this white, very fine frothing lines is what's going to make your painting. When you get closer to the area where the top of the wave is starting to really come over in a much fuller curl, you're going to do it the same way. You're going to lay your rigger down on the top of that blue wave and just arch it forward, and you will create that nice curve. Lay your brush flat. Don't try to do it with just the point. Lay it flat, pull it forward in an arching motion, and that will give you that nice pullover wave. You can do as much or as little as you would like. Again, you can do your splattering wherever you would like. If you want some splatter in that curl over wave, you can do that. If you want your splatter more just at the sand line, you can do that wherever you would like your splattering to be. However, there should be a lot of white splatter on your sand from the water that has come in and is already going back out. That can be done at the very end or as you are doing this. If your white areas need made whiter, the bigger sections, use a bigger brush and go ahead and paint them in a little bit more with some white. You can layer your white and make it more intense, because some of those areas need to be intense. You can dry brush on those areas, and that'll give you a little bit of the blue in between. Whatever works for you, but there are some areas that you want to be much whiter than the rest. And all you need to do is just put an additional wash of your white on those areas. Less is better, remember that. You can always add, but to take it off, you'll just create a mess, especially with this white. Now I'm very happy with the white part of my water. So now I'm going to get some of my white and I'm going to dry brush it same way in an arching way from the edge of my froth up into my sand. These are those areas where the water has come in, and as it's gone back out, it's left some froth on the sand. If you look at your picture, you'll see it's mainly farther away from you because the parts that are going to be closest to you, not only will we do a little bit of dry brushing, but that's where we're going to be doing our splatter. This is strictly dry brushing right now with my number 2, or if you want, if you can use your number 4 and you want to make that arch slightly upward also to make it look like you have to walk down towards the water. Okay, and then you're going to do some splatter. You're going to be using either your wisp for your splatter, or you can use your fan brush for your splatter, whichever works for you. But you want to make sure that your white is nice and wet when you go to do your splatter so that you actually get something that's coming off your brush. Now you're almost done. We have to put a little bit of a shadow under some of the thick froth because that's what's going to give your picture some dimension. So with some black, you're going to pick some of the areas of your froth and you're going to put a shadow right underneath the froth line. Now, it's not going to be everywhere. It's going to be where your froth is the thickest. It'll most likely be on the edges that are closest toward you. So the parts of the froth that are facing away from you, you wouldn't actually be seeing a lot of the shadows. It's more just the froth that is facing you, the side that is facing you. There will be a couple little spots actually in the water that the froth is creating a shadow on the sand in the shallow water, but there's not a lot of that, so don't get too carried away. These are nice thinner black lines of shadow, and you don't have to do them really far away from you. You can kind of start them about a quarter of the way over, but again, it depends on your frothing. If it's nice and big and thick, then you might need shadow. Otherwise, just the thicker areas closest to you will get your shadowing. Don't make your shadowing lines too thick. You can have a couple places where they might be thicker, but don't make them too thick. And this is what's really going to add to your picture, what's really going to make your frothing have a dimension to it also. So take your time with it. If you're a little bit nervous about doing it, then, kind of wait until you've rested up a little bit. You've worked on this painting a long time. You don't want to get, tired and then make a mistake. So kind of look at it, decide where you're going to be putting your frothing before you do it. Start with a thin line. If you feel that it needs to be thicker, you can always thicken that line, but don't get too thick too fast. Don't do too much too fast. Do a little bit at a time. Finally, when you're done with all of your shadowing and you feel that you need a little bit more splatter anywhere, you can always add that splatter. Just take your time. Make sure your splatter is nice and wet so that something will actually come off of your brush when you are splattering. You don't want to splatter with paint that's too thick, because then nothing really will happen. So make sure it's nice and wet, but make sure it's nice and intense also, so that when you are splattering and when that paint actually does splatter, it won't dry to show nothing. Great painting. Certainly wish I was there right now. Hope you enjoyed this lesson on your frothing water. And as always, once you've finished painting, sit back, relax, admire what you've done, and always, always happy painting.